Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. Today we are checking out this incredible stainless steel kit from ASBA Drums in France. Now, unfortunately, we're not in France. ASBA Drums is in France, and they were kind enough to send these over for us to check out on their way to the dealer where they're going to ultimately be sold. I'm as fresh to this as all of you, and it is super exciting because it's also the exact same sizes as the kit that I use for almost everything, so I have a little bit of a place to start in terms of what to expect from pitches and things, but this is a completely different beast from any wood kit you've ever played. What we're working with today is a 13x8 tom up there, 16x16 on the floor, a 24x14 kick, and they were also kind enough to furnish us with a stainless snare. The shells of these drums are 1 millimeter thick, which is pretty thin, but they had the presence of mind to afford a folded over edge so that there isn't a sharp edge of the metal going into the heads themselves, affording us nice long life. Don't need to worry about any trouble with those interacting. Finally, the bass drum is finished off with these beautiful maple hoops in a mahogany finish, and we have triple flange 2.3 millimeter hoops on everything else. Now, let's hear these at what we consider to be a medium-low tuning for this set of drums, operating at their happiest place. Right out of the gate, a lot of what we would expect, big, huge, boomy, blooming sounds, but also with a beautiful amount of articulation afforded by the metal shells, tremendous amount of volume, an alarming amount of volume, but very easy to control. In my mind, I was expecting them to possibly be a little challenging to manage because they can get so loud. They're very forgiving, they're very pleasant to hit, they feel incredible also. Tons of rebound off of them, they're just a joy. As we always do, we are utilizing the heads that came on the drums from the manufacturer. As you know, they've chosen these for these drums. They feel that they represent things the best. So today we have coated emperors on the toms and the snare. We have clear ambassadors on the bottoms, and the bass drum has an Evans EQ4 batter and an EQ4 resonant. Today, as usual, we are utilizing no EQ, compression, or post-production of any kind on any of these sounds, and also the bass drum is wide open, no muffling at all. If you're curious about the signal chain and the gear that we're using to record these, it's all listed in the description below. In the past, I was a person that was a little scared of very large drums, or what were relatively very large drums to me, because I imagined that they would be challenging to manage in terms of the sustain and the tone and the overall bigness of the sound. At this point in my career, I've come around to the idea that when you have size like this, it's not just about having volume, it's about having tonal headroom too, hitting them harder, not choking out, continuing to give you more tone, and effectively just giving you a higher volume ceiling where you might run out of headroom, literally, with other drums. Now, something that we weren't necessarily expecting out of this drum set that was incredibly pleasing is the projection at all of the tunings we experimented with was amazing. The fundamental was getting to all of the mics in a really beautiful way, to the point where at one moment while we were listening, we realized we were only listening to the overhead mics and nothing else was engaged, and the sound was still full, beautiful, powerful, and contained everything. Let's listen to a complete mix of the kit, and then we're going to pull everything away till it's just the overheads. As you can hear, and also see, this speaks to their capacity to get to the audience, to get to microphones that are more distant, and to really behave amazingly in the room in terms of filling the space with sound and not being sort of compartmentalized into only sounding good where the drummer's sitting. Now we're going to go ahead and raise the tuning on everything a little bit, not all the way to jazz country, but more of like an upper middle range where these start to have a different kind of sonorous quality between all the drums. Now, where the previous tuning had punchy, round, beefy sounds to it, these are starting to get a little more melodic and interactive despite how big the drums physically are. This means that grooves that are comprised mostly of the toms and the kick, or maybe that have the snare turned off, are starting to have an incredibly melodic and chordal quality as we move through playing 2 or 3 of the drums simultaneously within the groove. Probably the most exciting thing at this juncture in the journey is that we were able to do all of this again wide open, including the bass drum, with no post-production, no muffling, no anything. And that means that all of that is now at our disposal to sweeten and change things if we want to, or we can just leave them sounding like this. This speaks directly to the idea that the greatest sound you can possibly start with is going to give you the most options later, whether you're playing live, recording, or whatever it is, and also keep you inspired as you're playing to dig deep, experiment, find new grooves, find new ideas, and keep you excited about the drums you're playing. We've spoken in previous videos about ASBA drums and their long and storied history, including the periods where they were technically defunct, and they've come back recently and entered the mix of the international drum community with a lot of great new technological advancements and interesting construction ideas. Now, having said that, these are actually an old idea that was started by them over 50 years ago. They are credited with being the first company to commercially release a steel drum set or a metal drum set at all. And this led to a boom of that kind of construction and design in the 70s, where we saw other companies really popularize them who had a bigger footprint in the industry. What this means for us is that even though this is a brand new kit, structurally and design-wise, we're actually playing a piece of history here that was designed far before I was born, before many of us were born, and still sounds as good today as I'm sure it did then, and fits right into the modern landscape of music, stylistically, in terms of the appearance, and in terms of what I would ask of a drum set for making any of the music that I do. Some truths and myths about metal drums that I definitely had inside of me before playing these were the idea that they were super loud, but not just loud, that the whole spectrum of the drum's dynamics was just shifted to the louder side. Definitely not the case. The quiets are just as quiet as they ever were. There's just more headroom. And in that headroom is the complete tone of the drum, and not just more attack to the point where you're hitting it so hard that it chokes. Another thing that I expected was that it would have a more bright or brittle tone, thinking about moving between like wood snares and metal snares. But because of the range that toms and bass drums are generally tuned in, we still have an enormous note that sounds really warm and isn't lacking in terms of low mids and projecting of that beefy part of the sound. Another interesting note about this kit is some of these drums are a little bit shallower than you might expect. We do have a 16x16 floor tom, which is pretty standard. The rack tom is slightly under depth. It's 13x8, where standard would be 13x9 or maybe even 13x10. Finally, the bass drum is 14 inches depth by 24, which we think of as standard for 70s and 60s and back then before they started to get super duper deep. This is part of the reason why these drums are so versatile. When you start to get into a lot of physical depth of the drum, it's a lot of time for that air to move in that distance with the range that that drum is tuned in, and those can have a much larger impact on the behavior and physical experience of playing the drum than the diameter itself. If you've ever played like pancake drums or super shallow ones, you can imagine this going in the other direction, where going extremely shallow gives you a different sort of perspective, even at the same, again, diameter that you might be used to. In terms of the in-person tuning experience of these drums, when we went to tune them up in the first place, they behaved like any other drum that I've ever tuned up. They gave a lot of overtone at the edge when I was tuning with my finger or tapping with the drum key, which made it really easy to get an even pitch on each of the heads. And I discovered also when we moved from our first tuning to our second that I raised the pitch of the batter and the resonant head the exact same amount. I didn't really experiment much with that. I gave a certain amount of tension to one, gave the same to the other, hit it. It was the same sound, just raised up higher. And that's not true of all drums, and it makes the whole process a whole lot easier, because if you have an easy time getting one of them to move and then you have to fuss with the other one, you can really get mired in whether or not you're making the right decisions for the sound that you're after. And at the end of the day, any good drum that I want to use needs to be able to move between tunings easily, quickly, and without a lot of speed bumps. It's worth noting also that at both of these tunings, I really did hit them as hard as I could when I was experimenting with them, and I did not hit a ceiling where they couldn't handle any more energy, which I can honestly say I haven't actually experienced with toms on a drum set before. There's always been a ceiling, but I didn't find it with these. When I imagine what I would want to use these for, or who might want to use these, obvious first choice, rock, heavy hitting rock maybe even. Also pop music, not just because they sound beautiful and they hold down the low end nicely. They also look amazing, and if the appearance on stage is one where you want to make sure your kit plays into it, this is a unique, interesting, and fascinating experience on top of a beautiful sound. Additionally, if you play New Orleans kind of music or even big band jazz or something where you want to have a big bass drum that's also wide open, that you're feathering and playing syncopated stuff on, and you still want to have clarity in that syncopation, this drum has that in spades. And as we saw, starting to pitch the toms up, they still have a ton of tone because the shells are so thin. And that means that the tuning range can go as high as you want or go all the way down in the gutter just as easily. On top of all that, we have the amazing projection and clarity of the complete sound of these drums because of the shells and the design, which means that no matter how you tune them, you're not going to have to worry about the sound not making it to the listener or the microphones, because this is a structure that is purpose-built to take this tone and send it as far as it possibly can. All right, that about does it. I hope you enjoyed checking out these drums with us today. We had a blast with these. There's so much I could say about them. Don't want to go on for too long, but do please follow the link below. Check out everything that ASBA has to offer. They have a lot of options, a lot of snares, a lot of interesting designs, and innovative drums that we've talked about here a little bit. And we would love to know your experiences with giant drums, be they metal or not, but particularly if they were metal, because they're starting to get into vogue again. They're starting to become something that people are excited about again. A lot of companies making them, and this was our first experience with them, and they were so much fun.